Have you ever felt your thoughts racing, long after the world has fallen silent? When your heart feels heavy, and your mind won't let you rest, even though the night is calm around you. In those quiet hours, we often meet the ache of our own worries, the soft hum of questions without answers, the weight of things we cannot control. Tonight, we'll rest in one of the most tender promises in all of Scripture, Philippians 4:6-7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This passage isn't only a verse, it's a gentle doorway to peace, a whisper that tells your heart, you are not alone, even in your worry. It reminds us that peace is not found by escaping our troubles, but by resting in the presence of the one who holds them all. Before we begin this night's reflection, if these stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more nightly reflections, and share where you're listening from tonight. Your words and presence help keep this space warm and growing. Together, we build a quiet haven for hearts that long for rest. Now, take a slow breath. Let your shoulders relax. Let your thoughts soften, and let your heart open to what God has prepared for you tonight. Because tonight, you will walk the path from worry to stillness, from the noise of your thoughts to the quiet of God's peace, from striving to surrender. Now, close your eyes if you wish, and let this story carry you into calm. Let us begin. The night air was still, cool, and faintly sweet with the scent of rain that had passed hours before. In the quiet city of Philippi, lamps glowed softly behind shuttered windows, and the world had gone to sleep. But one small household remained awake. A man sat near the flickering flame of an oil lamp, his hands folded upon the worn wood of a table. His name was Silvanus, a follower of the teachings of Paul, and tonight, his heart was restless. The parchment before him held words freshly written, words sent from a prison cell in Rome, from a man who had every reason to despair, yet somehow every line shimmered with peace. Silvanus traced his fingers over the ink that read, "Do not be anxious about anything," and he wondered, how could a man behind stone walls, chained and beaten, write about peace? Outside, the wind sighed through the streets, carrying faint echoes of the day's noise. Within, Silvanus's mind replayed the worries that had taken root in his heart. The Romans had grown suspicious again of those who gathered in the name of Christ. Business was slow. Food was harder to find. His children had fallen ill. Each thought piled upon the next, like waves against the shore. He tried to pray, but even his prayers trembled with fear. He remembered Paul's voice from years before, when the apostle had visited their city. The words had been strong, full of joy that seemed untouched by hardship. Paul had told them that joy and peace were not gifts given when life was easy, but treasures discovered when faith refused to break. When you have nothing left to hold, he had said, that is when you learn who is truly holding you. Now, those words echoed again through the quiet room. Silvanus looked toward the sleeping faces of his family, their breath steady in the dim light. He thought of the many nights Paul must have sat awake in prison, his body weary, yet his heart steady in hope. The thought steadied him. He whispered a prayer he could barely form into words. Lord, Teach me this peace that passes understanding. Oi! The candlelight danced upon the walls, soft and trembling. Sylvanus took another breath, and began to read the letter again from the beginning. Paul's handwriting was uneven, yet every word was filled with calm assurance. Rejoice in the Lord always, it began. Let your gentleness be evident to all, the Lord is near. Oi! That last phrase, the Lord is near, lingered in his mind. Could it be that peace was not the absence of fear, but the nearness of God? He imagined Paul sitting in the shadows of his prison cell, chains on his wrists, yet smiling faintly as he wrote those very words. Sylvanus pictured him lifting his eyes toward a small window high above, where a single beam of light pierced the darkness. Perhaps peace had found him there, not because the chains had broken, but because his heart had learned to rest even while they remained. Slowly, Sylvanus felt something shift within him. The worries did not vanish, the hunger was still real, the danger still near. But something gentle began to settle inside him, like a soft blanket over a weary soul. The words of Paul began to take root. By prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, he whispered. He had prayed many times before, but thanksgiving? Tonight, that felt different. He looked around the room again. His wife stirred softly in her sleep. The small hands of his children rested near the dim glow of the lamp. Gratitude began to rise within him, fragile but real. For the roof above him. For the warmth of the flame. For the letter that had found its way to his trembling heart. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Oi! Outside, the wind quieted. The stars emerged between drifting clouds. The city of Philippi slept in peace, and for the first time in many nights, Sylvanus felt his breathing slow. It wasn't that the world had changed, but that his heart was being gently taught to rest, even while it waited. He folded the parchment carefully, pressed it to his chest, and murmured, "Peace that surpasses understanding." The words felt alive now, not as a lesson, but as a presence. Somewhere, beyond his reasoning, beyond the reach of his worries, a stillness had come. And as the candle burned low, and the dawn waited just beyond the horizon, he whispered once more the words of Paul, not as a command to follow, but as a promise to trust. Do not be anxious about anything. The night deepened, and with it, peace. The morning light crept softly into the narrow streets of Philippi, washing the stone walls in shades of pale gold. Dew shimmered upon the clay rooftops, and the gentle murmur of the marketplace began to stir. Sylvanus rose before the sun had fully climbed, his heart still wrapped in the quiet peace that had touched him through the night. He stood near the window, watching the light unfold across the city, and felt a calm that words could not explain. His mind tried to trace it, to understand it, yet every time he reached for a reason, it slipped gently away. It was as if the peace itself whispered, "You don't need to understand me, only rest in me." He thought again of Paul's words, "Be anxious for nothing," and realized how impossible they seemed by the world's measure. How could one not be anxious when life trembled on uncertain ground? When hunger loomed, when the future seemed fragile? Yet Paul had written those words not from comfort, but from captivity. Not from freedom, but from a cell that smelled of damp stone and rusted chains. Sylvanus remembered the stories told of how Paul would sing hymns in the night, his voice echoing through the corridors like a prayer that refused to die. And suddenly, Sylvanus understood something deeper. Peace did not come after the storm had passed, but within it. Like a steady flame that refuses to be snuffed out by the wind. The kind of peace Paul spoke of was not born from escape, but from surrender, a trust that God's presence is greater than any fear that surrounds us. As he prepared to leave the house, his wife awoke and smiled sleepily. "You seem different," she murmured. Sylvanus returned her smile and whispered, "Paul's letter, it reminded me that worry is like a shadow, it moves where the light does not shine. But if we turn our hearts toward God's light, the shadow cannot remain." Oi! Outside, the streets were alive with the sound of merchants and the laughter of children. Yet even amid the noise, a stillness lingered within him. He greeted his neighbors with warmth, shared a loaf of bread with a traveler, and found joy in simple acts. It was not that life had grown easier, his troubles had not vanished, but they had lost their power to rule his heart. Later that day, as the sun began its slow descent, Sylvanus joined others at the gathering place, believers who met quietly to read the letters of Paul and pray together. They sat in a small courtyard surrounded by olive trees, their branches whispering in the wind. The letter from Rome was read aloud once more, the words flowing like living water through their weary hearts. By prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. The reader paused, and a hush fell over the group. Each person felt the weight of those words. Prayer was something they all knew, but thanksgiving, even in hardship, was something sacred and rare. A young woman, her voice soft and trembling, spoke. "I've prayed for deliverance from my fear, but perhaps I should thank God even in it. Because fear reminds me how much I need Him." The others nodded, and for a moment, the quiet was filled with something holy, a shared understanding that peace was not a distant gift, but a presence already near. Sylvanus closed his eyes as the final verse was read. "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." He felt those words settle deep within him, like roots finding soil. He imagined that peace, not as something fleeting, but as a guardian, standing watch over his thoughts, protecting his heart from the storms of the world. When the gathering ended, the believers lingered under the trees. The sky above glowed with the soft colors of evening, gold fading into rose, rose melting into violet. Sylvanus stayed behind for a moment, letting the quiet sink in. He thought of his family, of the uncertain days ahead, and yet, beneath every thought was the steady rhythm of calm. He whispered, "Lord, thank you for this peace I cannot explain." The wind moved gently through the branches, as if the world itself exhaled with him. The leaves shimmered, and the faint song of night birds began to rise. The day had begun with light and ended with stillness, the same peace flowing through every hour, unbroken, undisturbed. As Sylvanus walked home, he carried with him not only Paul's letter, but its living truth. Each step felt lighter, each breath slower. For the first time in many nights, he looked up at the stars not with questions, but with quiet trust. And somewhere beyond the reach of reason, in the space where faith lives and understanding fades, the peace of God watched over him. The moon rose gently above Philippi, a pale pearl resting in the dark sea of the sky. The streets had grown quiet once more. Only the occasional whisper of a late traveler's footsteps broke the silence. Inside his small home, Sylvanus sat near the faint glow of an oil lamp, his children asleep nearby, their faces peaceful in the flickering light. He opened the parchment again, its edges curled slightly from the warmth of his hands. The inked words of Paul still shimmered faintly under the lamplight, and as his eyes moved across them, something inside him stirred. The words no longer felt like distant teachings, but like a voice speaking gently through the stillness of the night. "Do not be anxious about anything," Sylvanus read it slowly, letting every pause settle deep into him. He thought of how often those words might have been whispered by others across the world, by mothers who worried for their children, by travelers uncertain of tomorrow, by believers hiding their faith in the shadows. And somehow, the words carried the same calm for each of them. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. An image began to form in his mind, that of Paul in the dim prison cell. Perhaps the air there was heavy with dust. Perhaps the walls were cold and wet. But Sylvanus could almost see the old apostle sitting in quiet prayer, his head bowed, his lips moving in gentle rhythm, his heart filled with something greater than despair. Paul's peace was not denial. It was not pretending that pain did not exist. It was the stillness of a man who had handed his fears to the one who held all things. It was the rest of someone who trusted that God was near, nearer than the chains around his wrists, nearer than the stone walls that confined him. Sylvanus thought about his own chains, invisible, yet real. The worries that bound him day after day. The silent fears that kept him awake at night. The memories of loss, of failure, of prayers that felt unanswered. And yet, tonight, something was different. Those same fears still existed, but they no longer ruled his breath. They sat quietly now, smaller, gentler, as if resting in hands not his own. He whispered softly into the stillness, "Perhaps peace begins, not when fear disappears, but when it no longer commands our heart." Oi! Outside, the sound of the wind brushing against the shutters reminded him of waves upon the shore. The night had a rhythm, steady, patient, the same rhythm that pulsed through creation itself. Sylvanus imagined that rhythm as the heartbeat of God, constant, faithful, unchanging, holding the world even while it slept. He rose and stepped outside, the air cool against his skin. The sky stretched endlessly above him, stars scattered like promises across eternity. He closed his eyes and lifted his face toward the heavens. "Lord," he murmured, "you are here, even now." The words felt lighter than air, yet filled with the weight of truth. For so long, he had measured peace by the state of his world, by safety, by comfort, by things going right. But tonight, standing under the vast, quiet sky, he understood that true peace is not found in circumstance, but in presence. The presence of God, constant and near. The city lay silent below him. He could hear the distant murmur of the river, the faint rustle of fig trees in the breeze. Every sound felt alive, as though creation itself was breathing in harmony with the Creator. And Sylvanus, for the first time in many seasons, simply breathed with it. He thought again of the line Paul had written, "The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding." The phrase now pulsed gently in his mind, like the rhythm of his own heartbeat. How could peace surpass understanding? Perhaps because it did not depend on understanding at all. It was a peace that arrived where thought could not reach, where explanation had no voice. The stars shimmered above him, and one seemed to flicker brighter than the rest. He smiled faintly, imagining that it was God's way of reminding him that even the smallest light can pierce the darkest sky. And in that moment, the worries that had once seemed so large now felt like shadows against the brilliance of faith. He returned inside, the quiet following him like a cloak. His wife stirred slightly as he settled beside her, and in her half-sleep, she whispered, "You're at peace." Sylvanus smiled. "Yes," he said softly. "And I don't even know why." Oi. He lay back and listened to the rhythm of the night, the gentle wind, the creak of the old wooden beams, the distant hum of the city at rest. Everything seemed to speak the same truth, that peace does not shout, it whispers. And those who listen closely will hear it. As sleep began to take him, he whispered one last prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for peace I cannot explain, but can feel so deeply." Oi. And before the night surrendered to dawn, Sylvanus drifted into rest, carried not by answers, but by trust. The dawn rose gently once more over the hills of Philippi, its first light touching rooftops and stone paths with quiet grace. Birds stirred in the olive trees, their songs soft, unhurried, as if even creation itself was waking with peace. Sylvanus opened his eyes to the pale gold of morning. For a moment, he simply listened, to the faint rhythm of his children's breath, to the creak of the old timbers above, to the stillness between sounds. There was something sacred in that silence, something he had never noticed before. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake his wife, and watched as light spilled across the room. His thoughts were calm, clear, no longer racing ahead of his heart. The letter from Paul rested on the table, and though he had read it again and again, it drew him near once more, like the warmth of a hearth on a cold morning. He unrolled the parchment and whispered the words aloud, letting them move through him as a kind of prayer. "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." Each phrase felt like a step, one that carried him away from worry, and closer to rest. Sylvanus thought of how Paul must have written this. Perhaps his hand trembled from exhaustion, yet the Spirit guided every stroke. Each word had weight, not the heaviness of fear, but the fullness of trust. And now, here he was, hundreds of miles away, still being comforted by that same trust. He poured a small cup of water and stepped outside into the courtyard. The stone floor was cool under his feet, and the air was scented with rosemary and dust. A neighbor passed by with a basket of figs and greeted him with a quiet smile. "Peace be with you," she said. Sylvanus nodded. "And with you." Oi. The phrase lingered after she had gone. "Peace be with you." How often they had said it in gatherings, almost as a formality, a polite farewell. But now, he felt the weight of its truth. To wish peace upon another was not a casual blessing, it was an invocation of God's very presence. To say peace be with you was to say may God himself walk beside you. He took a slow sip of water, feeling gratitude welling up like a spring within him. He realized that Paul's invitation, with thanksgiving, was not merely a suggestion to be polite before God, but a way of seeing. Thanksgiving turned prayer into worship. It opened the eyes to blessings already given, even amid trials yet unresolved. He looked around, at the worn sandals near the door, at the olive jar nearly empty, at his children laughing faintly in their sleep. Each small thing whispered a reason to be thankful. The world had not changed overnight, yet the way he saw it had. A gentle breeze moved through the courtyard, carrying the scent of the sea. He imagined Paul feeling that same wind years ago, when he first arrived in this city to preach. How strange and beautiful it was that one man's faith, forged through chains and hardship, could send ripples of peace across generations. Silvanus closed his eyes and began to pray. Lord, I give you what I cannot control. I offer you my fears, my uncertainties, my longing for answers. I release them, one by one, into your hands. And in their place, I thank you. For life, for breath, for the promise that you are near. Oi! As he prayed, his words slowed. The pauses between each thought grew longer, until his prayer became silence. But even that silence felt alive, as though God himself was listening in the stillness, answering not with speech, but with presence. When he opened his eyes, the morning had brightened. The noise of the city had begun to rise, but his heart remained quiet, steady beneath the surface. He understood now that the peace Paul spoke of was not fragile. It did not shatter under pressure. It was something eternal, like a river that flows deep beneath the earth, untouched by storms above. He smiled faintly. Peace that surpasses understanding, he murmured again. It does not ask me to figure it out, only to receive it. Oi! Inside, his wife had awakened. She set bread on the table, and their children began to stir. The day ahead would bring its share of tasks, challenges, and unknowns. But somehow, he felt ready. Not because the future was clear, but because his heart was held. As they shared their simple breakfast, laughter filled the small home. Silvanus felt the weight of joy, gentle, grounding, and real. The same peace that once reached a prison cell had now reached this humble table. It needed no grand display, it arrived quietly, like the morning light. And so, as the sun climbed higher, Silvanus lifted his eyes once more and whispered the truth Paul had written from his chains. The Lord is near. Oi! Those words wrapped around him like a promise. Near in the joy. Near in the worry. Near in every breath. The world outside moved on, traders shouting, children running, carts rolling over cobblestones. Yet within him, a stillness held. The peace of God guarded him, invisible, strong, unshakable. And that morning, beneath the growing light of day, he felt something he had never truly known before, freedom within stillness. The day unfolded slowly, like a scroll unrolling beneath the sun. The marketplace filled with sound, footsteps, laughter, the hum of voices blending in the warm air. Yet through all the noise and motion, Silvanus carried an unshakable stillness inside him. He moved through the crowd as one who had found an invisible rhythm, a peace that walked beside him. He noticed how the sunlight played across the baskets of fruit, how the olive leaves shimmered in the breeze, how the laughter of children echoed like a melody of heaven. For so long, he had hurried past these moments, lost in worry. But now, each one felt like a gift. At the edge of the market, he met an older man he hadn't seen in months. Lucius, a weaver who had once joined the small gatherings of believers but had since stopped attending. His eyes were tired, the weight of hardship hanging upon his shoulders. "Silvanus," he greeted softly, "you look different. Peaceful, somehow." "Oi." Silvanus smiled. "I've been reading a letter from Paul," he said. "You remember his words? Be anxious for nothing, but in every situation, present your requests to God." Lucius nodded, though his expression held quiet pain. "I've prayed," he said, "but my hands are still empty. The work has been scarce, the debt's heavy." "Oi." Silvanus placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Paul wrote those words from prison," he said gently. "Yet his peace remained. Maybe it isn't about what our hands hold, but what our hearts release." "Oi." Lucius lowered his gaze, tears glimmering faintly. "Then what do I do with my fear?" he whispered. Silvanus paused, hearing in those words an echo of his own nights of restlessness. He answered softly, "You give it back to him. Again and again. Until peace becomes stronger than fear." "Oi." They stood together in silence, two men surrounded by the noise of the world, yet wrapped in the quiet of faith. Silvanus reached into his small pouch and handed Lucius a few coins, not much, but enough to buy bread for a few days. "Peace is not only something we feel," he said, "it's something we share." "Oi." Lucius took the coins, and for the first time in many months, his lips curved into a faint smile. "Thank you," he said. "Maybe I'll come to the gathering again." Silvanus nodded. "Come. Bring your heart as it is. That's all the Lord asks." "Oi." As he walked home, Silvanus thought about how easily worry had once closed his eyes, how it had kept him from seeing others, from hearing the small songs of grace around him. Peace, he realized, had not only quieted his heart, it had opened it. Later that afternoon, he sat beneath the shade of the fig tree near his home. The air was warm, and the sounds of the city drifted softly from a distance. He thought about Paul, a man chained, yet free. A man who turned a prison cell into a sanctuary. Silvanus imagined him writing by dim light, perhaps pausing between sentences to whisper a prayer for those who would one day read his words. He felt a stirring of gratitude, deep and wordless. How strange, that peace could grow even in suffering. That it could pass from heart to heart like light from a single flame. The same peace that held Paul was now holding him, and now reaching others through his small acts of love. He leaned back against the tree and let his eyes close. Around him, the wind moved gently through the leaves. Each sound felt like a whisper, a language of comfort only the soul could understand. His thoughts drifted back to that phrase again, the peace of God which surpasses all understanding. Surpasses understanding, he turned the words slowly in his mind. To surpass is to rise above, to move beyond what the mind can grasp. Peace like that could not be reasoned into existence. It had to be received, like rain falling on open hands. He realized how much of his life had been spent trying to understand peace, searching for reasons, explanations, certainty. But the peace of God was not an answer. It was a presence. Not a thought to be solved, but a heart to be held. He opened his eyes, watching a small bird land near his feet, a sparrow, pecking gently at crumbs on the ground. For a moment, the bird looked up, its head tilted toward him as though listening. Sylvanus remembered the words of Jesus, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care." Oi! The memory filled him with warmth. If God could care for the smallest of creatures, how much more would He care for those who trust in Him? The sparrow fluttered its wings and rose into the air, disappearing into the open blue. Sylvanus followed it with his eyes until it was gone. And then he whispered, "Yes, Lord, I understand now. Your peace is not something I find, it is something you give." Oi! The afternoon sun began to fade. Shadows lengthened across the stones, and the first coolness of evening returned. Sylvanus rose, brushed the dust from his robe, and walked back inside. His children were laughing, his wife humming softly as she prepared the evening meal. Everything felt simple, holy in its simplicity. He looked at them, these faces he loved more than life itself, and knew that even if tomorrow brought hardship, even if uncertainty returned, something inside him would remain unshaken. Peace had taken root. And when peace lives in one heart, it can quietly fill a home. As night approached, Sylvanus sat once more beside the lamp, the letter open before him. The words were the same, yet they felt eternal. He closed his eyes and whispered them one last time before sleep. "Do not be anxious about anything." The light flickered, shadows swayed gently on the walls, and as silence settled, peace breathed through the room like a tender wind. The moon had not yet risen, and the night sky hung deep and endless above Philippi. A stillness rested over the city, the kind that only comes after a long day, when even the earth seems to sigh in relief. Inside the modest home, the lamp burned low, and Sylvanus sat once more beside its glow, his thoughts quiet, his heart steady. The day's moments played gently in his mind, the laughter of his children, the brief talk with Lucius, the peace that had carried him through each breath. It felt as though God's hand had written upon the pages of his day, line by line, each one whispering, "I am near." He reached for Paul's letter again, though by now he almost knew the words by heart. The parchment rustled softly in the still air. His fingers traced the lines, stopping once more at the verse that had changed everything. "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Oi! Guard your hearts and your minds. The phrase lingered. Sylvanus thought about the word guard, a word often used for soldiers standing watch through the night. Perhaps Paul had chosen it on purpose, knowing what it meant to live surrounded by danger and fear. God's peace, Paul said, was not only a feeling, it was a guardian. He imagined it now, peace standing watch over the city of his soul. At its gates, anxiety would approach like a thief in the dark, whispering its familiar lies. What if tomorrow brings loss? What if everything falls apart? What if God forgets you? But at the threshold stood peace, calm, unmovable, radiant. And every whisper of fear dissolved before its quiet strength. No argument, no shouting, only stillness. A stillness that said, "You are safe here." Sylvanus smiled faintly at the thought. Peace as a sentry. Peace not passive, but powerful. It did not flee from fear, it silenced it. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The air smelled of oil and burning wick, of bread still warm from the evening meal. His wife lay sleeping nearby, her breathing slow and peaceful. His children, curled beneath their blankets, murmured softly in dreams. It was a small home, but tonight it felt like a sanctuary. The peace of God guarded it all, not the walls, not the roof, but the hearts within. Sylvanus felt the truth of it rise through him like a steady flame. He could not see this peace, yet he knew it was there. He could not explain it, yet he could feel it watching over every thought, every fear that dared to stir. He thought again of Paul, sitting alone in his prison cell. Perhaps he too had pictured the same thing, not guards of Rome with weapons and chains, but the peace of Christ surrounding his heart like unseen armor. While the world kept him bound, heaven kept him free. A soft breeze slipped through the window, and the flame trembled. The shadows swayed, and for a moment Sylvanus imagined that peace moving through the room like a living presence, unseen but near, surrounding his family, resting upon each heart. He whispered quietly, "Guard us, Lord, as you did Paul, as you do all who trust you." Oi! The room grew quieter still. Outside, the world was dark, but inside, the night was tender. He sat there for a long time, not thinking, not striving, simply being. The peace that surpassed understanding was no longer an idea written in ink, it was something alive within him. He began to understand why Paul had written with thanksgiving. For how could one not give thanks for peace like this? Not earned, not deserved, not explained, but freely given. He rose to add a bit of oil to the lamp, watching the flames swell and settle. The light reflected in his eyes, and in that moment, he thought of how God's peace did the same within the soul, flickering at times, yet never extinguished. Even when faith trembled, peace endured. He sat again, resting his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. He whispered into the silence, "Lord, when the world is loud, be my quiet. When my thoughts are restless, be my calm. When I cannot see the way ahead, remind me that you guard my heart." Oi! The prayer was simple, but it filled the room like fragrance. It drifted upward, wordless and real, and the silence after felt almost holy. He knew now that God was not far, not hidden in the heavens, but close as breath. A sound stirred outside, the faint cry of an infant from a nearby home. Then another sound, a lullaby sung by a mother, her voice carrying gently through the window. The melody was soft, tender, full of love. And Sylvanus thought, perhaps peace sounds like that. A mother's song in the dark. A reminder that even in the night, we are not forgotten. He closed his eyes, listening until the song faded into the stillness. He smiled. "Yes, Lord," he whispered, "you are near." Oi! The lamp burned lower. The wind quieted. And as he lay down beside his wife, the last thought that drifted through his mind was not of fear, nor of tomorrow, but of that single, steady truth. Peace guards the heart that prays, and the mind that trusts. The night deepened, and sleep came as gently as grace. The dawn returned quietly to Philippi, soft light spilling through narrow windows, tracing gold upon the stone floors. The air was still cool, touched by the scent of earth and olive leaves, the kind of morning that feels half awake, as if the world is slowly remembering to breathe again. Sylvanus rose with the sun, his mind unhurried, his steps light upon the worn floor. He no longer woke with the old rush of worry, the restless tug of thoughts that demanded answers. Instead, he rose in peace. The same peace that had met him in the night now followed him into the day. He crossed the small courtyard, where dew clung to the leaves like pearls. He paused to listen. Birds sang softly, water dripped from the clay roof tiles, and somewhere in the distance, a shepherd's call echoed through the hills. All around him, creation moved in perfect rhythm, untroubled, at ease in the care of its maker. "Do not be anxious about anything," he whispered again. The words flowed naturally now, not as instruction, but as memory, a truth etched deep within his soul. His youngest child stirred behind him, rubbing her eyes, clutching the edge of her blanket. "Father," she murmured, "why do you wake so early?" Sylvanus smiled. "To thank God for the morning," he said softly. She tilted her head. "Even when there's nothing special." "Oi." He knelt beside her, his eyes gentle. "Every morning is special," he whispered. "Even when we do not see it. It's a gift we unwrap slowly, with gratitude." "Oi." She smiled sleepily and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Then I will thank him too," she said. Her small voice carried the simplicity that Sylvanus had been learning all along, that peace is not earned by great understanding, but by childlike trust. As the family gathered for breakfast, the morning sunlight filled their small home. The bread was simple, the olives few, but laughter filled the spaces where worry once lived. His wife hummed softly, and Sylvanus joined her, a quiet joy threading between them like woven silk. Later that day, he walked to the riverbank, where the believers often met to pray. The air shimmered with warmth, and the sound of water soothed the heart like a song that never ends. A few others had already gathered: Lydia, whose faith had once brought light to their city; young Marcus, who carried a scroll of Paul's other letters; and several others whose faces bore both weariness and hope. They greeted one another with smiles and gentle words. Then they sat together in silence, listening to the river flow. Lydia spoke first, her voice calm. "Paul's letter, it came at the right time. The city grows harder toward us. Yet somehow, I feel no fear." "Oi." Sylvanus nodded. "That's the miracle of it," he said. "Peace that makes no sense, yet holds us steady." "Oi." Marcus unrolled his scroll, reading softly, "The peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." His voice trembled slightly as he read, but his eyes shone with conviction. "It feels like those words are alive," he said. "Like they don't just speak to us, they stay with us." "Oi." They sat in quiet agreement. Around them, the water glimmered under the sunlight, catching small reflections of heaven. Sylvanus let his hand trail through it, cool, smooth, constant. The river reminded him of peace itself, always flowing, always present, whether seen or not. He closed his eyes, breathing in the moment. "Maybe that's what Paul meant," he said softly. "That peace doesn't always stop the storm, it flows beneath it. even when everything above is raging.
Oi. Lydia nodded. Yes.
And perhaps when we stop struggling to understand, the current can finally carry us.
Oi.
Her words lingered in the air, soft and true. The group bowed their heads together in prayer. No one spoke for a while, only the sound of the river filled the space.
It was enough.
The peace that passed understanding did not need words. It only needed hearts willing to be still. When the prayer ended, they rose and walked together along the bank. Children played nearby, skipping stones. An old man mended a net, humming under his breath. Life continued, simple, sacred, unhurried. Sylvanus looked around and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not because everything was perfect, but because God was present in the imperfection. As the sun began to sink, painting the river in hues of amber and rose, Sylvanus paused and whispered, "Thank you, for this peace that stays, even when I forget to seek it."
Oi.
He walked home slowly, the cool evening air wrapping around him. The lamps in the city began to glow one by one, and smoke rose gently from hearths. Every light felt like a prayer rising toward heaven, small, steady, unbreakable. By the time he reached home, his children were playing at the doorway, their laughter spilling into the street. He joined them for a while, letting joy anchor him in the moment. When the stars began to appear, they all went inside, and Sylvanus lit the lamp once more. Its flame shimmered like a reminder: peace endures, night after night, dawn after dawn. As his family drifted to sleep, Sylvanus whispered his final prayer of the day. "Lord, teach me to live inside your peace, not as a visitor, but as one who belongs there."
Oi.
The night answered not with words, but with stillness. The peace of God lingered, deep, silent, faithful. The night sky over Philippi shimmered with quiet beauty, stars scattered like whispers of eternity across the heavens. The air was cool, soft against the skin, carrying the faint scent of olive trees and river water. Within his home, Sylvanus sat once more beside the lamp's tender glow, its light flickering gently upon the parchment that had become his most cherished treasure. He read the letter again, not to learn, but to remember. Each word from Paul was like a heartbeat, steady and alive, echoing the rhythm of a faith that refused to fade. And as he read, he no longer imagined Paul in a prison of despair, but in a sanctuary of peace. A man enclosed not by chains, but by grace. Rejoice in the Lord always. The Lord is near, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Sylvanus closed his eyes and breathed those words in like air. It was strange, how each time he read them, they seemed new. They met him differently, depending on where his heart stood that day. Tonight, they met him not in worry, but in gratitude. He whispered softly, "Peace is not the absence of storms, it's the presence of the one who walks upon them."
Oi.
As the night deepened, Sylvanus rose and stepped outside. The city slept quietly. Only a few lanterns flickered in the distance, tiny beacons keeping watch through the darkness. He walked toward the edge of the courtyard and looked to the hills beyond. Their outlines rested like shadows against the starlit sky. And for a moment, he imagined that somewhere out there, another believer was reading the same letter, whispering the same prayer, feeling the same peace. The thought filled him with warmth. The peace of God was not his alone, it was a river flowing through every heart that trusted in him. A peace shared, multiplied, eternal. He sat upon the stone step, his back against the wall, his gaze fixed upon the stars. He remembered his own restlessness, the sleepless nights, the anxious thoughts that once circled endlessly in his mind. How small they seemed now, how distant, like echoes of another life. He realized that peace had not arrived all at once. It had come quietly, one surrender at a time. Every fear released had made room for calm. Every prayer whispered had opened a window for grace. And though he had not noticed it happen, peace had been building within him like dawn behind the mountains, unseen until the light finally broke through. He smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes softening. "It grows," he murmured. "Like morning."
Oi!
The sound of footsteps stirred behind him. His wife appeared in the doorway, a shawl draped loosely around her shoulders. "You couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. Sylvanus shook his head, smiling. "I'm not awake from worry, but from wonder."
Oi!
She stepped beside him and followed his gaze to the stars. "It's beautiful tonight," she said softly. He nodded. "It is. But what's more beautiful is that God holds every one of them, and still has time to hold us."
Oi!
She leaned her head on his shoulder, and together they watched the sky in silence. The peace between them needed no words. It simply was, quiet, deep, unwavering. After a while, she whispered, "Do you think Paul feels this peace even now?" Sylvanus smiled. "I do. I think it's what keeps him alive. And maybe, through his words, it keeps us alive too."
Oi!
They sat there until the chill of night grew stronger. Then, hand in hand, they returned inside. The lamp's glow greeted them, steady, familiar. Sylvanus refilled it with oil, and the flame brightened again. The flicker of light reflected in their eyes, the same light that had guided Paul, that now guided them. He turned to his wife and said quietly, "When I first read his words, I thought peace was something far away, a promise for another time. But now I see, it's here. It's already here."
Oi!
She nodded, her eyes shining with soft faith. Maybe peace doesn't come to those who understand, but to those who trust.
Oi!
He smiled. "Yes, that's it exactly."
Oi!
They said a short prayer together, nothing elaborate, just words wrapped in sincerity. Gratitude for the day, for the letter, for the presence of God in the simplest of things: bread, laughter, love, and stillness. When they finished, silence lingered, but it was a living silence, full, not empty. The flame swayed once more, sending golden light dancing across the walls. Sylvanus whispered, "This peace, it's not mine to keep. Tomorrow, I will share it."
Oi!
He didn't yet know how, perhaps through a kind word, a quiet prayer for a stranger, a visit to one in need. But he knew this: peace, when given, multiplies. It does not run dry. He sat for a moment longer, letting that truth settle into his heart. Outside, The wind moved through the trees, a soft breath upon the earth. He could almost feel it passing through the open window, brushing against his face like the touch of unseen grace. He closed his eyes and whispered one final prayer before rest. Lord, let your peace guard me tonight and guide me tomorrow. Let it fill the spaces where fear once lived. Let it flow from me as freely as it flows from you.
Oi.
And as he lay down beside his wife, his final thought before sleep was not of tomorrow's worries, nor of what might come, but of this quiet, ever-present truth, that peace is both a promise and a person who never leaves. The night deepened, stars burned softly, and once again, the peace that surpassed all understanding kept watch. The morning came quietly once again, light spilling gently through the curtains like soft gold, finding its way across the wooden floor and resting upon the table where Paul's letter still lay. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of baked bread and olive oil. The home of Silvanus stirred slowly to life, the sounds of his children whispering, the soft rustle of linen, the rhythm of another day beginning. But within him, something deeper was awakening too. A peace that had not faded with the night. A peace that felt as if it had roots, growing, stretching, holding him steady. He sat beside the table, unrolling the parchment again. The edges had begun to wear, softened by touch and time. His eyes traced the familiar words, but now they read like a story, not just written by Paul, but written through Paul, by the hand of God himself. He read slowly, breathing with each line, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God."
Oi.
He closed his eyes and whispered, "Every situation." That phrase lingered in the air, gentle, yet vast. Every situation meant no corner of life was excluded. Not the nights of hunger. Not the days of doubt. Not the griefs unspoken, or the hopes that had yet to bloom. Everything could be brought before God. Silvanus felt the weight of that truth, and its freedom. How long had he carried burdens silently, thinking them too small or too constant for prayer? How often had he whispered quick pleas but held on to the fear instead of releasing it? Now, he understood. Prayer was not escape. It was surrender. He whispered quietly, "When I pray, I hand the world back to you."
Oi.
As the morning light brightened, his wife joined him at the table, her eyes still heavy with sleep. She smiled softly. "You're reading again." He nodded. "It's strange, these same words feel different each day. As if they change shape when my heart does." She poured him a cup of water and said gently, "Maybe it's not the words that change, but us."
Oi.
He smiled at her wisdom. "Yes," he said. "Peace teaches the heart how to hear."
Oi.
The children laughed nearby, playing with a small wooden cart their father had carved. Their joy filled the air like music, innocent and free. Silvanus watched them and realized that peace had made room for joy, quiet joy, unforced, pure. The two were intertwined, like sunlight and warmth, each calling the other forth. After breakfast, he went into the marketplace. The city was alive with noise and color, vendors calling, children weaving between stalls, merchants negotiating beneath the rising heat. Yet even in the commotion, the stillness within him remained unshaken. He walked slowly, greeting familiar faces, offering small kindnesses wherever he could. He saw Lucius again, the weaver he had spoken to days before. The man looked brighter now, his shoulders lifted, his eyes clearer. "Sylvanus," he said with quiet joy, "I came to the gathering again. You were right. Peace doesn't come from understanding, it comes from trust."
Oi.
Sylvanus placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm glad," he said. "Peace begins the moment we stop fighting what we cannot control and start trusting who holds it."
Oi.
Lucius nodded deeply. "And since that day, work has returned. Just enough to provide, but more than enough to remind me that God sees."
Oi.
They both smiled, standing in the midst of the market, two men who had found a treasure the world could not see. Around them, the city buzzed with endless motion, but between them, time felt still. As the day wore on, Sylvanus bought a loaf of bread and some oil, then made his way home. The sky had begun to change, the light turning softer, the horizon brushed in gold. He passed a group of children chasing one another through the dust, laughter rising like prayer, and he thought again of Paul's words. "The Lord is near."
Oi.
He paused to watch the sunset, the colors spreading like divine paint across the canvas of the sky. "Near." The word repeated in his thoughts like a heartbeat. God was not far above the clouds, not distant in mystery, but near, nearer than breath, nearer than thought. That nearness was peace itself. He whispered to the wind, "When you are near, Lord, there is no room left for fear."
Oi.
The first stars began to shimmer above. Sylvanus turned toward home, his heart light. He carried no burden, only gratitude, not because life had become easy, but because peace had made it holy. Every moment, even the simplest, was touched by divine purpose. That night, as his family gathered by the lamp once more, he told them about Lucius, about the small miracles of the day. His children listened wide-eyed, his wife smiling quietly. They spoke for a while, then grew silent, the calm of evening wrapping around them. Sylvanus looked at each of them, his family, his blessings, his reason to trust, and said softly, "Peace is not something we wait to find. It's something we decide to live in."
Oi.
His wife reached for his hand. "And it grows," she said. "Every day, a little more."
Oi.
He nodded. "Like the dawn."
Oi.
Outside, the night deepened, but their home glowed with a gentle light, not from the lamp alone, but from the quiet joy that peace had kindled within. It was the kind of light that did not flicker when the wind came. The kind that reminded them all that God's peace is not fragile. It is forever. As the stars watched over the city, Sylvanus whispered a final prayer before rest. "Lord, thank you for the peace that guards, that teaches, that stays. Thank you for reminding us that no matter what comes, you are near."
Oi.
And as sleep embraced them all, that same peace, unseen, unbroken, continued to watch over the little home in Philippi, keeping its silent promise through the night. The night passed softly, and when morning came, it arrived not with urgency, but with grace. The light of dawn spread slowly across the hills, spilling into the streets of Philippi like warm honey. The first sounds of the city began to stir, the low call of merchants, the quiet rhythm of footsteps, the rustle of fabric in the wind. But within the home of Silvanus, peace lingered like incense from a prayer that had not ended. It wrapped around the rooms, resting upon the sleeping faces of his children, and upon the heart of a man who had learned to breathe with God's rhythm. He woke gently, his thoughts unclouded by the rush that once marked his mornings. He no longer felt the weight that had so often pressed upon his chest, that restless need to solve, to predict, to hold everything in his grasp. Now, there was release. A kind of freedom that came not from answers, but from trust. He sat by the window as the first light touched his face. The world outside was alive again, the sound of hooves on cobblestone, the laughter of women at the well, the cry of a child calling after his father. Yet to Silvanus, it all felt quiet, as though the peace within him softened the noise of the world itself. He reached for Paul's letter, still resting upon the table. Its parchment edges curled gently, worn from his hands. He opened it, but this time he didn't read. He simply held it, smiling. The words had already moved from paper to heart. They no longer needed his eyes to find them. He whispered, almost to himself, "Peace guards, peace stays, peace speaks."
Oi.
4 days now, he had lived inside that truth. That peace was not a fleeting comfort but a guardian. Like an unseen sentry, it stood over his thoughts when fear tried to return. Whenever worry whispered, peace would answer with silence, and silence was enough. He rose quietly and stepped into the courtyard. The sky was brightening. The scent of fresh bread drifted faintly from a neighbor's home. A fig tree stood near the wall, its branches heavy with fruit. Silvanus reached up, plucked one, and smiled at its sweetness. Even the smallest things, he thought, carried traces of grace. As he stood beneath the tree, he remembered the words of Jesus, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you." The thought came like a whisper on the breeze. God's peace was not the world's fragile calm, not the quiet before trouble, nor the relief that follows its passing, but something deeper, constant, and alive. He realized that the world could neither give nor take this kind of peace. It was heaven's gift, placed within, guarded by Christ himself. He looked toward the street, where Lucius, the weaver, was walking with his young son. Their laughter echoed softly, and Silvanus raised his hand in greeting. Lucius smiled and waved back, the kind of wave that said, "All is well, even when all is not easy." Silvanus felt a joy stir within him, the quiet joy of seeing peace multiply. One heart at rest had touched another, and now it spread outward like ripples across water. Paul's letter had become a seed, and faith had made it bloom in unseen gardens. He thought about how peace grows. It does not rush, nor force. It arrives softly, waits patiently, and settles deeply. Like morning light, it does not startle the dark, it simply replaces it. The day unfolded slowly. Silvanus visited the gathering once more by the river. Lydia was there, reading aloud from another of Paul's letters, her voice steady and full of warmth. Around her, faces listened, some tired, some hopeful, all softened by the same presence that had filled his home. When the reading ended, silence rested over the group. It was not awkward or empty. It was holy. The sound of the river flowed beneath their stillness, as though creation itself joined their worship. Then, quietly, they began to pray, not with many words, but with long pauses, where the Spirit spoke in the space between. Silvanus opened his hands and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for peace that holds us when words fall short."
Oi.
As they prayed, he felt something deeper still, a quiet revelation rising from within. This peace, he realized, was not just a comfort to rest in, but a calling to live by. It was not passive. It was active, a way of being that changed how one walked, spoke, and loved. When the gathering ended, he lingered by the river, watching the sunlight shimmer upon the water's surface. The flow reminded him again of how peace moved, steady, unseen, yet powerful. He could not hold the river in his hands, but he could walk beside it, drink from it, trust its course. So it was with peace. As he made his way home, a child ran past him, chasing a butterfly. The little one stumbled, fell, and began to cry. Silvanus bent down, lifted him gently, brushed the dust from his knees, and smiled. "You're all right," he said softly.
See.
"The butterfly waits for you." The boy's tears turned to laughter, and he ran again. Silvanus watched him go and whispered, "Even small kindness can carry great peace."
Oi.
The sun lowered slowly over Philippi, painting everything in hues of amber and rose. The marketplace quieted, and the air turned cool again. Silvanus returned home to his family, laughter, bread, and the gentle hum of evening. Life had not become easier, but it had become lighter. Every burden felt held by unseen hands. He knew, deep within, that this was what Paul had meant. Peace was not a prize after struggle, it was God's presence within the struggle. It did not erase hardship, it transformed how one walked through it. That night, as he closed the door against the cool wind, he whispered one final prayer, "Lord, let my heart never forget how near you are, even in the silence, even in the storm."
Oi.
And as darkness covered the city once more, Silvanus lay down to rest. The peace of God, the same peace that filled Paul's prison, that flowed through letters and prayers and hearts, now wrapped itself around this quiet home in Philippi. It guarded them all, like light unseen, steady as eternity itself. The moon hung low over Philippi that night, its light silver and calm, flowing softly through the quiet streets. The hum of the city had long faded, leaving behind only the gentle chorus of night, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind, the distant rhythm of the river's song. In his home, Silvanus sat awake once more, not restless, but reflective. The world around him slept, yet his heart felt alive, alert in the stillness. He had begun to love these hours, the quiet spaces between dusk and dawn, when time itself seemed to slow enough for the soul to listen. The lamp beside him burned low, its golden glow steady against the cool night air. On the table lay Paul's letter, beside it a small clay cup of water. Silvanus ran his hand gently over the parchment, feeling the familiar ridges beneath his fingers. Each crease, each line, told the story not just of Paul's faith, but of his own journey toward peace. He closed his eyes for a moment, and let memory carry him backward. He remembered the first night he had read the words, when his heart was restless, his mind filled with shadows of worry. He remembered how the peace had come slowly, first as a whisper, then as a steady pulse. And now, weeks later, it had become the very rhythm of his life. He whispered softly into the night, "The peace of God, it does not leave when the world grows loud. It remains, like the heartbeat beneath all things."
Oi.
A faint smile touched his face. He thought of how peace had changed him, not just in feeling, but in being. He no longer reacted to fear as before. He no longer tried to control every storm. Instead, he had learned to stand still, to let God's calm speak louder than his worry. He thought of his wife, who now sang while she worked, her voice gentle, carrying a lightness that had returned after many seasons of wait. He thought of Lucius, the weaver, whose eyes now shone with quiet hope. He thought of the gatherings by the river, each prayer softer, each silence deeper, as peace rippled from one heart to another. And he thought of Paul, the man behind the words, who even now might still be sitting in that dim Roman cell. He imagined him looking toward the narrow slit of a window, moonlight brushing the stones, his hands clasped in prayer. Perhaps, Silvanus thought, Paul was praying not for freedom, but for others to find this same peace. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, "for a man whose chains became a message."
Oi.
He rose and stepped quietly outside. The air was cool, the scent of jasmine floated through the darkness. He walked to the edge of the courtyard and looked up at the night sky, endless and brilliant. The stars glimmered like scattered promises. He felt small beneath them, yet somehow entirely seen. He thought about the phrase again, which surpasses all understanding. He had pondered it many nights, and still it filled him with wonder. Perhaps that was the point. Peace was never meant to be understood. It was meant to be experienced, to be trusted, to be received, not reasoned. He lifted his hands slightly toward the sky. "There are things I will never understand," he said softly, "but I will still thank you for them. Because your peace doesn't need my understanding to be real."
Oi.
The wind stirred gently, and the branches of the fig tree moved above him. It felt like an answer, a nod from heaven itself. He breathed deeply, the cool air filling his lungs, and exhaled slowly, releasing every fragment of worry that still lingered. He began to walk slowly along the narrow lane near his home. The stones were cool under his feet. The city was silent, yet not empty. It pulsed with unseen life. He passed the homes of neighbors, the shuttered market stalls, the dark outlines of olive groves at the edge of town. Each place carried its own quiet story, its own burdens. Yet he knew that the same God who had brought peace to his heart could bring it to them as well. He prayed softly as he walked, not in long sentences, but in simple phrases between breaths. "For those who are afraid tonight, bring peace. For those who have lost hope, bring peace. For those who do not know you yet, let your peace find them."
Oi.
Each word felt like a small light released into the dark, flickering, yet alive. He had no grand sermon, no mighty act, only a heart at rest, whispering peace into the night. When he returned home, the lamp was still burning faintly. He sat beside it once more, feeling the warmth on his face. The silence in the room was deep, sacred. He could almost feel God sitting beside him, not seen, not heard, but unmistakably there. He bowed his head, his voice barely a breath. Lord, if this peace can reach a man in chains, if it can cross cities and seas and hearts, then let it never stop with me. Let it pass through my words, through my kindness, through my silence. Let others rest because I have learned to rest in you.
Oi.
He stayed there for a long time, not speaking, not moving, only breathing. And with each breath, he felt that peace deepen, until it became not something he carried, but something that carried him. The lamp flickered softly. The stars shifted slowly above the sleeping city. And within that stillness, a truth took root so deep it could not be shaken. Peace was not only God's gift, it was His presence itself. Sylvanus leaned back, his eyes closing, his heart steady. And in that moment, as the night wrapped gently around him, he knew that even if the world outside trembled again, the stillness within would remain unbroken. The next morning rose like a hymn, soft light flowing through clouds that drifted lazily over the city. The air carried the scent of wet earth, the memory of a gentle rain that had fallen before dawn. Every droplet upon the leaves shimmered like 1,000 tiny mirrors, each reflecting the quiet mercy of a new day. Sylvanus awoke slowly, his heart resting in that silence before sound. The peace of God had followed him into sleep, and now it followed him into morning, as constant as breath. He turned toward the window and watched the first rays of sun fall upon the city roofs, painting them gold. "Thank you," he whispered, "for one more day to live inside your peace."
Oi.
He rose, washed his face, and sat once more beside the table. Paul's letter still lay there, worn and beloved. He unrolled it with care, though he no longer needed the words to remember their message. His fingers traced the phrase that had shaped him: "The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus."
Oi.
The word guard echoed again. He imagined it now, not as an unseen wall, but as a soft light, glowing quietly within him, warding off every anxious thought before it could take root. It was not an armor that hardened the heart, but one that softened it. Peace was strength that looked like gentleness. He smiled faintly. "Guard me still, Lord," he murmured, "not from trouble, but from forgetting you are near."
Oi.
The sounds of morning began to rise, the faint laughter of children, the creak of cartwheels, the song of birds returning to their nests. His wife began to hum in the next room, her voice like sunlight woven through melody. His children soon joined her, and their voices filled the home with warmth. It was ordinary, beautifully ordinary. Yet to Sylvanus, ordinary moments had become sacred. He remembered the words of Jesus once more: "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." For years he had thought that rest meant stillness of body. Now he knew it was stillness of soul. After breakfast, he stepped outside. The street was still damp, and his sandals left faint prints along the stone. Neighbors waved from their doorways, greeting him with smiles. A small girl handed him a fig, her tiny hand sticky from its sweetness. "For you," she said shyly. He thanked her and laughed softly, the simple joy of her gift reminding him again that peace gives even in small ways. He made his way to the riverbank, where the believers often gathered. The water moved gently, reflecting the sky's soft blue. A few familiar faces sat together in prayer. Lydia was there, her hands clasped, her eyes closed. Lucius sat nearby, weaving reeds as he prayed, his fingers steady, his heart light. The group smiled as Silvanus approached. He sat among them, breathing in the stillness that seemed to rest upon the water. They began to share what God had been doing in their hearts. One by one, they spoke of how peace had reached them, in fear, in hunger, in uncertainty, and how it had stayed. Lydia spoke of her customers in the market, how she now met anger with calm. Marcus shared how he no longer feared what others said of his faith. Even the youngest among them spoke of nights that once felt heavy, now filled with rest. Silvanus listened, his eyes soft with gratitude. When it was his turn to speak, he paused for a long moment, letting the wind carry his words. "Peace," he said, "is not something we find once and keep forever. It's something we learn to return to, again and again. Like a river, it keeps flowing, even when we walk away. But when we stop and listen, it is always there."
Oi.
The group fell quiet. The river shimmered as if nodding in agreement. Somewhere, a dove cooed in the branches above. The world itself seemed to breathe with them. He looked up at the sky. When Paul wrote those words from his prison, he continued softly, he must have known we would need them most when we felt bound ourselves. Yet even behind stone walls, his peace lived. Because peace does not depend on where we are, but on who is with us.
Oi.
Lucius nodded. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "peace is the truest freedom."
Oi.
The group smiled, the kind of smile that comes when truth feels like home. They prayed again, each whispering quietly, each letting silence do most of the speaking. And when they finished, they lingered, not wanting to leave the stillness they shared. Eventually, they rose, each carrying peace back into their corners of the city. Silvanus stayed a little longer, watching the ripples move across the water. He thought of Paul again, the man whose peace had crossed oceans, whose letters had outlived prisons. He wondered if Paul knew, somewhere in his spirit, how far that peace would reach. He lifted his eyes toward the horizon. The light of the afternoon sun glimmered upon the river like threads of gold. He whispered, "Your peace flows further than I can see."
Oi.
Then, as he turned to walk home, he noticed something he hadn't before: flowers growing between the cracks of the old stone path. Tiny blooms, fragile yet bright. He knelt for a moment, touching one gently. "Even here," he said softly, "in places broken and forgotten, life grows."
Oi.
He smiled as he stood again, understanding the lesson. Peace was like that, growing quietly in the cracks of life, needing only the light of faith to bloom. It was not loud, not proud, not fleeting. It simply was. When he reached home, his children ran to meet him. He lifted them both into his arms, laughter spilling into the air. His wife watched from the doorway, her eyes warm. And in that small, simple moment, in the laughter, in the light, in the love, Silvanus felt heaven near. He whispered a quiet prayer that rose with the evening wind. "Let this peace never fade, Lord. Let it find every heart that needs it. Let it guard every mind that trembles. And let it live, through me, as a reminder that you are always near.
Oi.
The day exhaled its final light. The sky dimmed to rose and violet. And as night began its gentle return, the peace that had begun as words on parchment now filled every corner of his world, unseen, unending, and utterly alive. The sun sank slowly behind the hills of Philippi, and the city seemed to exhale. The heat of the day softened into cool air that brushed gently through the narrow streets. Windows glowed with lamplight, and the faint aroma of bread, smoke, and evening firewood drifted through the breeze. It was the hour when noise gave way to rest, and hearts began to settle. Sylvanus stood outside his home, watching the sky fade from gold to indigo. The first stars appeared, one by one, like small promises rekindled after the light of day had gone. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded loosely, breathing in the stillness. Each breath felt deeper than the one before, as though peace itself had become the air he lived on. From within, he could hear the soft sounds of his wife humming, her song mingling with the laughter of the children. It was a simple tune, a melody he recognized from years ago, one she used to sing when their first child was born. It spoke of trust, of patience, of hope. He smiled, realizing that she sang differently now, slower, softer, as if peace had slowed even her rhythm. He stepped inside, the glow of the lamp wrapping him in warmth. His children were seated near the hearth, tracing shapes on the floor with bits of charcoal. His wife looked up and smiled, her eyes catching the light. "You stayed long by the river," she said gently. "Did the peace follow you home again?"
Oi.
He chuckled softly. "It followed, and it grows stronger each day." He knelt beside the children, brushing the charcoal from their fingers. "Even here," he said, "in our small home, the Lord builds his kingdom, not with walls of stone, but with hearts at rest."
Oi.
She watched him as he spoke, his voice calm, his face untroubled. There had been a time, not long ago, when his words came hurriedly, his eyes clouded by worry. But now, it was as if something within him had been rebuilt, not with force, but with grace. When the children went to bed, Sylvanus and his wife remained by the lamp, speaking softly. The conversation drifted from the ordinary to the divine, from daily needs to eternal truths. She told him how the market had been kind that day, how a stranger had offered her more coins than her goods were worth. "I thanked him," she said, "but I think it was the Lord who sent him."
Oi.
Sylvanus nodded. Peace always brings kindness with it. It teaches us to see God in the smallest gestures.
Oi.
He grew quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the flame. "I used to think peace was something we asked for. Now I see it's something that asks for us. It waits, patiently, until we are still enough to notice it."
Oi.
She smiled at his words, her fingers tracing the rim of the clay cup before her. "And once it finds you," she said, "it changes everything."
Oi.
He reached across the table and took her hand. "It does," he whispered. "It changes fear into trust, noise into silence, and time into eternity."
Oi.
Outside, the wind stirred the olive branches, their shadows dancing along the walls. The room grew quiet again. They sat together, not needing to speak. The silence between them was full, not emptiness, but presence. God's presence. In that silence, Silvanus remembered Paul again. The image of the old apostle writing by dim torchlight appeared in his mind. Perhaps, at this very hour, Paul too was awake, not troubled, but praying. Maybe he was thinking of the people of Philippi, of faces like theirs. Maybe he was smiling, knowing that peace had reached them. Silvanus whispered softly, "I wish he could see how his words live here."
Oi.
His wife squeezed his hand. "He knows," she said gently. "Peace travels farther than we ever imagine."
Oi.
He nodded, the truth of it sinking deep. "Yes, it does. It moves from one heart to another, like a song that never fades."
Oi.
The lamp flickered, casting long shadows that swayed like waves across the room. He watched the light dance, and for a moment he thought, perhaps this is what peace looks like. A flame that trembles, yet never goes out. The night deepened. The stars outside shimmered brighter. The world seemed to rest in perfect balance, heaven above, earth below, peace between. Silvanus felt that balance inside himself, as though his heart had finally found its right rhythm after years of dissonance. He stood and moved to the window. The air was cool, the moon rising high. He whispered a prayer that flowed not from thought, but from the very stillness within. "Thank you, Lord, for teaching me that your peace is not fragile, that it lives through storm and silence alike, that it can guard the weary and lift the broken, that it asks for no proof, only trust."
Oi.
He paused, listening. The city beyond lay silent, but within that silence he felt God's nearness, quiet and undeniable. It was as though the night itself breathed with the same peace that now filled his heart. He turned back toward his wife. "Do you feel it too?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "It's everywhere, even in the quiet."
Oi.
He smiled. "Especially in the quiet."
Oi.
They extinguished the lamp, leaving only the moonlight to guide them. The room bathed in silver calm. As they lay down to rest, Silvanus whispered one last time into the stillness, "Peace beyond understanding, but not beyond reach."
Oi.
And with that, the house fell into perfect silence, not the silence of emptiness, but of completion. The kind that holds a soul steady between heaven and earth. The kind that needs no words, only gratitude. The dawn returned slowly, as though the light itself did not wish to wake the world too soon. The horizon glowed faintly over the hills of Philippi, and the first sound to break the silence was a single bird greeting the day with song. Silvanus opened his eyes to the pale light spilling through the window. The air felt cool upon his face, calm and clear. He lay still for a moment, listening to the rhythm of breath around him, his wife sleeping beside him, his children stirring softly in the next room. Peace still lingered, like a quiet guest who had stayed through the night, waiting patiently for him to rise. He sat up slowly, stretching his hands toward the faint warmth of the morning, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for another day held in your mercy, another day to walk in the peace that you give." The floor was cool beneath his feet as he crossed the room. The small flame of the lamp had died sometime before dawn, but the faint scent of olive oil still hung in the air. He poured water into a bowl and washed his face, the touch of it refreshing, grounding. The simple act felt sacred now. Each movement, each breath, each sound seemed touched by something divine. He stepped outside. The world was waking slowly. The rooftops shone with dew, the sky above pale as new linen. The same streets that once carried the weight of his worries now seemed different, lighter, as if even the stones had begun to rest. He walked toward the fig tree in the courtyard. The leaves stirred gently in the wind, still wet from the night's rain. He plucked one fruit and held it in his hand, feeling its smooth skin. Its sweetness reminded him of how peace had entered his life, slowly, tenderly, without demand. As he ate, he thought of the words that had carried him through these weeks. Be anxious for nothing, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting the words wash over him again. They were no longer a verse on parchment. They were the pulse of his life, the peace of God which surpasses all understanding. He whispered, "It still amazes me, Lord, how you guard the heart that surrenders." He remembered how easily he once lost his peace. A harsh word from a neighbor, a day without work, a moment of fear for his children, all could shake him. But now, it was different. The same things came and went, yet his heart no longer trembled beneath them. Peace had become a home within him. He walked through the streets as the city began to wake. The air, filled with the sound of voices greeting the day, pots clinking, merchants calling, the same world, the same rhythm, yet somehow transformed by stillness. He met Lucius near the marketplace. The weaver smiled wide as he saw him. "Peace to you, Silvanus," he said warmly. "And to you," Silvanus answered. "How is your heart?" Lucius laughed softly. "Light as a child's," he said. "The work is steady again, but even when it slows I do not worry. The peace you spoke of, it holds me too." Silvanus placed a hand over his friend's shoulder. "It is not mine I gave you," he said gently. "It is his. It flows through all who open their hearts to receive it." Lucius nodded, looking upward toward the morning sky. "Sometimes," he said, "I wonder why we were chosen to know it." "Because," Silvanus replied softly, "peace is not a reward for the perfect. It is a gift for the trusting." They parted with a smile, each returning to his work, each carrying the same invisible calm that tied them together. As the day passed, Silvanus helped his children gather herbs. Near the edge of the fields, the scent of wild thyme filled the air, and bees moved lazily from flower to flower. His youngest laughed as one landed on her sleeve, and Silvanus felt joy rise within him like sunlight through the clouds. He thought of Paul again, still somewhere far away, still imprisoned, yet freer than most men who walk the earth. What a wonder, he thought, that peace could live behind stone walls and still find its way here, to a humble home in Philippi. When the evening came, he returned home with arms full of herbs and fruit. His wife prepared the meal as the children told their stories of the day. Their laughter filled the room like music. He sat watching them, his heart full and quiet all at once. He whispered to himself, "The peace of God is not an end to life's noise. It is the music that plays beneath it, unseen, unbroken, everlasting." When night fell, they prayed together, a simple prayer of thanks, for the food, for the day, for the unseen grace that had carried them through it. And when the lamp was extinguished, and the stars took their place above, Silvanus lay down once more beneath the tender weight of peace. His last thought before sleep was gentle and sure. Peace does not visit the heart that understands. It dwells in the heart that trusts. And as the night deepened, that peace remained, breathing quietly through the walls, filling the silence with the nearness of God, unseen, unwavering, eternal. The night stretched wide and deep over Philippi, a velvet sky heavy with stars. The air was cool and fragrant with the faint sweetness of olive blossoms. All was still, except for the soft rhythm of wind brushing through the fig leaves outside the home of Silvanus. Inside, the world felt equally still. His wife and children were asleep, their breaths slow and steady in the hush of the night. Only the lamp near the doorway gave off its quiet glow. a single golden flame keeping watch. Sylvanus sat awake. Beside it, his hands folded loosely upon his knees. He no longer stayed awake from worry, but from wonder. There were moments in life, he thought, when peace felt so near it almost had a face, and tonight was one of them. He breathed deeply, the air cool against his skin. Every sound was soft, distant. The world itself seemed to speak in whispers. He looked toward the small window where the moonlight fell across the floor like a ribbon of silver. It glimmered faintly upon the old parchment resting on the table, Paul's letter, still open where he had last read it. He rose slowly, walked to the table, and let his fingertips brush across the paper. The ink had faded slightly now, but its message still burned bright within him. Peace, he murmured softly. The word alone was enough to calm him. He remembered how he once fought against silence, filling his nights with thoughts of what he could not change. He would try to fix everything with his mind, as though worry were a form of control. But now he understood. Peace was not found by doing more. It came by surrender, by letting go of what the heart was never meant to hold alone. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I release all that is not mine to carry." For a while, he simply stood there, breathing slowly, feeling the release in his chest. The peace of God did not come crashing in like thunder. It came quietly, like water filling an empty cup, until there was no space left for fear. He sat again near the lamp. The flame reflected gently in his eyes. The night outside grew darker, but he felt no fear of it. Darkness no longer felt like absence. It was simply the canvas on which peace painted its light. He began to think about how many hearts in the world might be waking tonight in fear, or lying sleepless beneath the weight of worry. He prayed for them softly, one breath at a time. For the mother who watches through the night, for the man who wonders how to feed his family, for the traveler far from home. "Lord," he whispered, "let your peace find them as it found me." He imagined peace as a river flowing quietly through the world, unseen yet unstoppable, moving through homes, through cities, through prisons and palaces alike, washing over every weary heart that dares to be still long enough to feel it. And as he prayed, he began to sense that river flowing through him too. His heartbeat slowed, his body relaxed, his thoughts softened into quiet shapes. The peace of God surrounded him, not as an idea, but as presence itself. He rose once more and stepped outside into the night. The air embraced him like a friend, cool and alive. The stars shimmered above like lanterns in the sky. He looked upward and whispered, "I do not need to understand you, Lord, only to rest in you." He could feel the stillness of creation. The trees stood tall and unmoving. The river beyond the city whispered its endless hymn. Even the night seemed to bow before the peace that held all things together. For the first time, Sylvanus felt that peace not only around him, but within him. It was as if every cell of his being had become quiet, and every quiet part of him was singing. He realized that peace was not just a feeling God gave, it was the very rhythm of his being, the heartbeat of heaven itself. And when a person trusts, they begin to beat in time with that divine rhythm. He stood there for a long while, until the night began to cool further, until the first hint of dawn touched the horizon with pale light. Then he whispered once more, a prayer that was less of words and more of surrender. "If I could say only one thing to the world, Lord, let it be this: be still, and know you are near." The wind stirred gently in answer, carrying the faint scent of morning. He turned to go inside, the peace within him deep and unmoving. He lay beside his wife and closed his eyes. The silence was complete now, but it was not empty. It was full, alive, holding him as tenderly as the night itself. And as he drifted into sleep, the peace of God, vast as the sky, deep as the river, soft as breath, guarded him still, unseen yet unbreakable, wrapping his dreams in the light of heaven's quiet. The morning unfolded slowly, a gentle unveiling of light and life across the city of Philippi. The streets glistened with the dew of dawn, and the soft hum of waking voices began to rise like a prayer from the earth itself. Sylvanus stirred beneath the first light that brushed across his face. His eyes opened, calm and unhurried. He lay there for a moment, letting the peace of sleep linger before the thoughts of the day began to form. He did not rush them, for he had learned that even thoughts must move at the pace of grace. He sat up and watched the sunlight stretch along the wall. It glowed golden, steady, alive, like the warmth of God's own presence filling the room. The same peace that had held him through the night was still here, unwavering, unbroken. He whispered softly, "The peace that guards still." His wife was already awake, quietly tending to the bread near the hearth. She glanced at him with a smile that needed no words. Their days had grown simpler now, but they were filled with a new kind of abundance, not of things, but of calm. He helped the children wash their faces and prepare for the day. They laughed and teased one another, their joy bright as the morning light. Sylvanus looked at them and thought, "Peace grows wherever gratitude is planted." After breakfast, he took his walking stick and stepped outside. The city was beginning to stir. Merchants arranged their goods. The baker opened his shutters. Children ran barefoot through the narrow lanes. Life continued as it always had. And yet, it felt different now. He walked toward the river again, where the believers often gathered. The air near the water was cool and filled with birdsong. The sunlight danced upon the surface like thousands of small flames. Each ripple reminded him of prayer, small movements that together formed a greater rhythm. Lucius was there already, sitting upon a rock with his sandals off, letting the water touch his feet. He looked up and smiled as Sylvanus approached. The two men sat quietly side by side, saying nothing for a long time, just watching the water flow. Finally Lucius spoke, softly, as if not to disturb the peace around them. "When I first came here, my heart was heavy," he said. "Now, it feels as light as this river. It moves, it carries, it rests." Sylvanus nodded slowly. "Peace does that. It does not erase what we have been through, but it teaches the heart how to flow again." They sat together in silence, listening to the sound of water against the stones. The rhythm of it felt almost sacred, as though creation itself was repeating the same truth again and again, that everything which trusts the flow finds its way home. Sylvanus closed his eyes, and for a moment, it was as if time had stopped. He could feel the heartbeat of the world beneath the surface of sound, the pulse of something holy that ran through everything, through the earth, through the water, through him. The peace of God, he thought, was not only a gift given to believers, it was the quiet order of the universe itself, all things resting in the one who holds them. He opened his eyes and looked toward the distant hills. A shepherd moved slowly across the horizon, his flock following in gentle rhythm. Sylvanus smiled faintly. "The Lord is my shepherd," he whispered, "and I lack nothing." The words felt true in a way they never had before, not because life had become easier, but because he no longer needed it to be. Lucius turned toward him. "Do you ever wonder," he asked softly, "how a man like Paul could write such peace while surrounded by pain?" Sylvanus looked down at the water, watching the light shimmer upon it, and answered quietly, "Because Paul did not see prison walls. He saw the presence of God within them. When peace lives in you, no wall can confine it." Lucius nodded slowly, letting the thought rest between them. After a long while, they stood and prayed together, their voices low and reverent. "Lord, keep our hearts in your peace, even when the world shakes, even when we do not understand. Let us rest in you." The breeze moved softly across the water, as though the prayer itself had become part of the wind. They parted with quiet smiles, and Sylvanus made his way back toward the city. Each step felt light, sure, guided. When he reached home, his wife was sitting by the window sewing a small cloth. The children played quietly nearby, laughter filling the air like sunlight. He sat beside her and told her about the morning by the river, the prayer, the peace that had settled upon them all. She listened with gentle eyes, and when he finished, she whispered, "That peace is changing the whole city." He looked at her thoughtfully. "How do you mean, everywhere?" She said, "People speak more kindly. They forgive more quickly. They help more freely." The letter you read aloud, the one from Paul, it did not stay on paper. It has become part of our lives. Sylvanus smiled slowly. "Peace spreads like light," he said, touching one lamp to another until all the darkness retreats. The day faded into evening, and as the sky turned golden once more, he stood outside watching the last lights settle upon the rooftops. He could feel that same peace glowing within him, quiet, eternal, unbroken. He whispered softly, "Let the peace that surpasses understanding guard us still tonight. Guard this home, guard this city, guard every heart that seeks your presence." The wind answered with a hush, the river sang faintly in the distance, and as the night descended again upon Philippi, peace, living, breathing, divine, wrapped around everything like an unseen cloak of light. The night came gently once more, draping the city in soft folds of silver light. The moon hung above Philippi like a quiet watcher, steady, unblinking, patient as peace itself. In the home of Sylvanus, all was calm. The laughter of the children had faded into dreams. The soft crackle of the dying hearth whispered against the silence, and outside, the olive leaves swayed slowly beneath the weight of the wind. Sylvanus sat awake beside the window, his face lit by the faint glow of the moon. His eyes followed the patterns of light and shadow that moved across the wall. Every shift felt alive, as if even the night carried meaning now. He took a deep breath, slow and measured, and whispered softly, "The Lord is near." Those words, once read from parchment, had now become his every breath. They were the quiet truth beneath all others. The world could change, kingdoms could fall, storms could rise, but the nearness of God did not waver. He rose and walked softly across the room, careful not to wake his family. The floor creaked beneath his feet. Each sound felt gentle, familiar, alive with memory. He stopped beside the table where Paul's letter still rested, and for a long while he simply looked at it. How strange, he thought, that words written from a prison had set so many hearts free. He touched the edge of the parchment with his fingertips, tracing the folds, the marks of use. It had traveled across seas and cities, carried by hands unknown, until it had reached this home, and through it, God's peace had reached him. He whispered into the stillness, "Your peace travels farther than my eyes can see, farther than my understanding can follow." He sat again, and closed his eyes. He imagined Paul in that cold Roman cell, the stone beneath him damp, the air thick with the scent of iron and dust. Yet in that darkness, Paul had found a light no wall could dim, a peace no chain could bind. Sylvanus saw it clearly in his mind, the old apostle sitting with a faint smile, whispering prayers for those far away, not asking for escape, but that the love of Christ might guard their hearts. That same prayer had now become Sylvanus's own. He whispered softly, "Lord, as your peace guarded Paul, let it guard me, and through me, let it guard others." He thought about how easily fear once ruled him, the way it entered quietly, settling into small corners of thought, until his whole heart felt heavy with worries. But peace had changed that. It did not argue with fear. It simply filled the space until fear had no room to speak. Now, he could feel that same stillness expanding inside him again, steady and sure. It did not demand that he understand, it only asked that he rest. He leaned back against the wall, letting his body sink into the quiet, and the night seemed to breathe with him. Every sound had rhythm, every shadow had softness. The peace of God was not only within him now, it was all around him. He thought of the gatherings by the river, of Lucius and Lydia and the others, of how their faces had changed in these few weeks. Lines of worry softened, laughter returned, hope rekindled. He realized that peace was not a feeling that visited one person at a time. It was a tide that lifted all who stood within it. He whispered again, "The peace that surpasses understanding is not meant to be kept. It is meant to be shared." Outside, a faint light flickered from a neighbor's window. Someone awake late into the night. He thought perhaps they too were reading the same letter, praying the same prayer. He smiled faintly, imagining peace passing quietly through walls, through hearts, through every weary soul who longed for rest. He rose once more and stepped outside. The sky was a blanket of stars, vast and eternal. The cool air touched his face, carrying the scent of earth and fig leaves. He whispered toward the heavens, "Lord, this peace of yours, it has no edge. It stretches beyond sight, beyond time, beyond reason. I cannot explain it, but I can live within it." He stood there for a long time, the moonlight resting upon him like a gentle hand. The city below lay silent, and for the first time in his life, he realized that true stillness was not the absence of sound, but the presence of God. He felt that presence now, like a quiet warmth in his chest, a steady pulse that matched the rhythm of the wind. He whispered one last prayer before returning inside. "May your peace guard every heart tonight, every home, every thought that wanders in the dark." He stepped back through the doorway, the floor cool beneath his feet. The lamp had burned out, yet the light within him needed no flame. He lay beside his wife, feeling her steady breath, and knew that all was well. Outside, the night deepened, but inside, the peace of God glowed like hidden fire, unseen, yet eternal. And as he drifted into sleep, that peace, quiet and infinite, kept its watch over them all, guarding hearts and minds in Christ Jesus, forevermore. The dawn rose slowly over Philippi, quiet and golden, its first light brushing the stones of the streets, touching rooftops and faces still heavy with sleep. The sound of the river drifted faintly through the air, a song that seemed older than time itself. In the small home by the courtyard, Sylvanus opened his eyes. The peace that had watched through the night remained, gentle, unbroken, a stillness deeper than rest. He lay for a moment, letting the light fall across his face, breathing softly as though in prayer without words. The world outside was the same, yet it felt new again, because his heart had learned how to see through peace instead of fear. He rose slowly, wrapped his cloak around his shoulders, and stepped outside into the morning light. The city had not yet fully woken. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of wet stone and blooming rosemary. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for the gift of another day in your calm." He stood for a while watching the sky brighten. The first rays of sunlight spilled over the hills, scattering across the city like blessings. Each beam touched something, a window, a tree, a bird stretching its wings, and with every touch the world seemed to breathe deeper. He thought again of Paul's words, written long ago in a dark cell far from here. "The peace of God which surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." That peace had indeed guarded him, through sleepless nights and uncertain days, through fear and through joy alike. It had become not something he visited, but something he lived in. He whispered softly, "It is true, Lord, even now. The peace that surpasses understanding guards me still." The sound of footsteps stirred behind him. His wife approached quietly, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes reflected the morning light as she smiled. "The peace follows you everywhere now," she said warmly. He turned toward her and smiled. "It is not that peace follows me," he said gently. "It is that I have learned to walk within it." They stood side by side for a long moment, watching as the sun rose higher. Birds crossed the sky in slow arcs, their wings catching the light like small flames. The world moved softly around them, not rushed, not demanding, simply unfolding at the pace of grace. He spoke again after a time. "I used to chase peace as though it was something far away, a prize to be found after trouble passed. But now I see. It was here all along, waiting for me to be still enough to notice." His wife nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with quiet joy. "That is what faith does," she said. "It opens the eyes not to see new things, but to see the same things newly." They both smiled, and she went inside to wake the children. The sound of their voices soon filled the house, soft laughter, small feet against the floor, life unfolding in the simplicity of morning. Sylvanus sat upon the step by the door, resting his hands on his knees, and watched the city come alive once more. The people of Philippi began their day, unaware that peace itself was walking among them in the quiet hearts of believers. He thought of the gatherings by the river, of Lucius, of Lydia, of all those who had carried Paul's words into their homes and their lives, each of them now a living letter, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of God. He realized then that the story was not about him, nor even about Paul. It was about what happens when divine peace touches human hearts, how it grows, how it spreads, how it transforms ordinary lives into quiet testimonies of faith. He whispered softly, "The peace of God is alive. It moves from one soul to another, until the whole world is lit by its quiet light." He rose and stepped back into his home. His children ran to him, their laughter bright as bells. He lifted them easily into his arms, their joy echoing through the room like a song of thanksgiving. His wife placed bread upon the table, warm and fragrant. He sat with them as they prayed, their voices overlapping softly, small and sincere. When they finished, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of presence, full of gratitude, full of peace. He looked at his family, then at the window where sunlight spilled across the floor, and whispered, "This is the peace that surpasses understanding, not the silence of absence, but the fullness of God within everything." The day stretched before them, uncertain, yet bright with promise, and in that simple home, built of wood and stone, something eternal lived and breathed, the peace that no storm could undo. Sylvanus bowed his head one last time and prayed, "Lord, let your peace continue to guard us, not only in moments of quiet, but in every noise of life. Let us carry it where it is missing, and become what your word has made us to be, living vessels of calm in a restless world." Outside, the bells of the marketplace began to ring. A new day had begun, and the peace that surpassed understanding flowed quietly through the city like a river of light. The day moved gently toward evening, the light softening into shades of gold and rose across the rooftops of Philippi. The city slowed its pace, merchants closing their stalls, children's laughter fading into the quiet rhythm of twilight. It was the hour when all things began to rest, and peace stretched its hands over the world once more. Sylvanus sat outside his home, watching the sky change colors. The air was warm but calm, carrying the scent of baked bread and olive wood smoke. He breathed deeply, the stillness filling his lungs, and he whispered softly, "The peace of God remains." Inside, his wife and children were tidying the last of the day's things, their voices gentle, their movements slow. The lamp had been lit, its small flame steady and sure, and through the open doorway its light spilled across the ground like a soft invitation to prayer. He closed his eyes for a moment, and listened, to the murmur of the wind, to the faint sound of the river in the distance, to the heartbeat of life itself. Every sound had become a hymn, every movement an act of worship. He thought again of the words that had carried him through so many nights. Be anxious for nothing, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. How many times had he whispered those lines now? How many times had they met him when he was weary, uncertain, afraid? And yet, each time, they felt new, alive, as if written again for this very moment. He opened his eyes and watched as his children ran into the courtyard, laughing as they chased one another through the dust. Their joy shimmered in the fading light, pure and free. He smiled, realizing that this too was peace, not quiet alone, but life in harmony with love. His wife stepped beside him and rested her hand upon his shoulder. Her touch was gentle, steady, like the very presence of God itself. He turned toward her and said softly, "Do you remember when we first received the letter from Paul? How heavy our hearts were then, how fear seemed to live in every thought." She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with memory. "I do," she whispered, "but the letter changed everything. It brought light into the dark places of our minds. It reminded us that peace is not something to chase, but someone to trust." Sylvanus smiled faintly, looking toward the horizon where the last of the light faded behind the hills. "Yes," he said quietly, "I once thought peace was something I would understand one day. Now I know. It was never meant to be understood, only lived." They stood together in silence, watching as the first stars began to bloom across the darkening sky, each one a quiet reminder that light endures even when the world grows dark. He whispered a final prayer. "Lord, thank you for teaching me that peace is not the end of struggle, but the presence of you within it. Thank you for guarding my heart, for watching over this home, for turning my worry into worship, and my fear into faith." The breeze shifted softly, moving through the olive branches above them, and in that gentle wind, he felt the nearness of God once more, the same nearness Paul had written about from his cell, the same peace that had crossed distance and time to reach them here. He thought of Paul then, imagined him older now, his beard streaked with grey, still writing by the dim light of a torch, still praying for those he loved across the miles. Sylvanus smiled, knowing that even if they never met again on this side of heaven, the same peace that filled Paul's heart now filled his. The stars brightened above, the moon rose higher, and all of Philippi seemed wrapped in quiet grace. The sound of laughter from nearby homes drifted softly through the streets, mingling with the whisper of leaves and the hum of the river. Sylvanus felt his heart swell with gratitude. He lifted his eyes heavenward and said one final time, "The peace of God surpasses all understanding, but it needs no explanation, for it is enough simply to know that it is real, and it is here." He turned toward his family, their faces warm in the glow of lamplight, and smiled. "Come," he said gently, "it is time to rest." They entered the home together, the soft sound of the door closing behind them, and as the lamp flickered in the quiet room, the peace of God, that eternal, unshakable peace, lingered still. It filled the silence, it filled their breaths, it filled every corner of their hearts, and so the story closed, not with an ending, but with a continuation. For peace does not end where stories do. It flows onward, through time, through generations, through every heart that dares to trust its giver. Peace that surpasses understanding. Peace that guards the heart. Peace that whispers still, even now.